Welcome to Hacking the Hustle. This is your host, Benjamin Sklar, and I am really excited to have my dear friend, Louie Zuniga, on the podcast. What's up, Louie?
Hey Benji, great to see you.
Great to see you too. We're on Zoom recording this. So, to let you know what we're talking about, the audience, we're going to be talking about Louie's journey from going to college in the United States to working on Wall Street to moving to Africa with the Peace Corps and the mindset that inspired him to do that and all the trials and tribulations he went through. So, really excited to be having Louie on the podcast. And as you know, my name is Benjamin Sklar, and Hacking the Hustle is about enlightening people about other people's stories and what inspired them and the hacks they learned in regards to their journey. This is the first time I ever give a little intro like this. I usually just jump right into it. So a little background on Louie. Well, Louie, you tell us. Louie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right, Benji. I grew up here in Houston, Texas, and I went to Catholic private school here, straight Jesuit, and really enjoyed my time in Texas. I'm half Mexican, grew up here, and I always kind of wanted to go into more academic. I wanted to study out of state. I wanted to go to a good school. I was really competitive as a kid, and that whole journey led me to finding the liberal arts schools and the liberal art education. And I was really just intrigued by the small school aspect, the liberal arts, studying a lot of different topics, and that got me to Amherst. So that's kind of funny because I met you at Amherst, Benji, and we had both grown up in Houston, both been involved in martial arts here, both had a lot of friends in common, and only met at Amherst. So I went to Amherst, and at Amherst I kind of grew, as everyone grows in college, but I grew in terms of my international understandings. At Amherst, I was exposed to so many people from around the world, made friends from so many different countries and cultures, and Amherst allowed me to study abroad. So I got my major in economics, but really I was just learning about different people, different cultures, different ideas. I did my junior year studying abroad in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. And by the time I graduated, I was speaking 3 languages. I was interested in Latin America and globalization, and I wanted to work in trade finance and on Wall Street, and everything lined up for it.
Yeah, that was a great little summary. So tell us about what it was like to graduate from college and move to New York City as a Texan to get a job at a bank. What was the desire to do that?
So I always grew up in a family that was really kind of business oriented. My father and my grandfather were both uh, worked in international business between Mexico and the U.S. So I kind of had this idea from growing up and being just exposed to it. And I don't know, I was into the entire global trade, global business. Um, I found that very attractive. So when I was studying abroad, I wanted to pick Brazil to learn about Portuguese and kind of be able to work all across Latin America. And as a Texan working in New York, living in different countries, you know, back in Texas, I kind of felt sometimes out of place. But when I was in New York working on an international team, I felt right at home. I was with all these other people from around the world, really competitive and just really dynamic situation. And I, it's an adjustment, but I adjusted to it well, and everything was going fine, except I just couldn't shake a feeling of like, after 1 or 2 years, I realized that it didn't seem to be as fulfilling as I thought it would be.
Mm, interesting. Do you feel like other people experience that as well? That moving to New York and working in corporate America is not what they thought it would be?
I think it is. I think it's a, it's part of the American dream, to go and get a high profile job and be and working around the clock and living that fast life. But once you're in it, you sometimes, some people wake up from the dream and some people don't. But for me, what happened was I had always been, you know, I had had a passion for education that started when I was in Amherst, and I was studying abroad. I took some courses on education. Um, I started seeing the world differently because, it happens when you travel and you see different cultures. And I started realizing I think I had taken my high school for granted and my college for granted. Like I had my best grades at college in my senior year because I was so much hungrier for education coming back from that experience abroad and seeing the, inequality of opportunity in
Mhm.
education. And that kind of, like, I got bit by this little bug and it just started to grow and grow. And I was curious about education. I became curious in education reform. And then even when I was all lined up to, to start this job on Wall Street, and I went for it and I was enjoying it. But even still, like, I was curious. I started doing volunteer work in education in New York. And I came to a crossroads about 3 years or 4 years into my time on Wall Street, where I could either stay in my position and really grow, and it would be great if I wanted to do trade finance, or I could drastically change course and jump into education. And I decided that I was going to take that leap, and I thought it was, the chance that I needed to try something different. And I'm really glad I did. And that jump landed me in West Africa and Cameroon in a small village with lots of great students.
Crazy. That's an amazing journey. What does education mean to you? And what about it motivated you to pull the trigger and move to Cameroon, which is a third world country in West Africa?
Big question. Education, education is means so much to me, right? Education is the future. Education is, um, it's life. It's your human experience. Like the human experience without education is nothing, right? You can be stuck in your house in Corona, but you can still have experiences. You can still learn. You can still try to do different things. Even in any human capable of learning and growing, that's education, right? So it doesn't have. I'm not thinking about just within the four rooms of a traditional classroom. I see education as an integral part of the growing human experience and really like our civilization.
Mhm.
Um, I became interested in education because of that, because I was so curious about how you teach and how people learn, and how we know so much now about how we can improve those methods, but how our systems in place to teach students are really backwards and old and broken.
Mhm.
So that kind of just like that contrast and that problem was appealing to me as something that we could work forward and improve the world for so many people.
Mhm.
So that kind of big idea planted a little seed in me, and that was getting me curious about education, how I can become involved in it. And as it grew, I was more in, like, I became more and more passionate about it, more curious. And I want to be a lifelong learner. I love my experience at college and my experience traveling and working in different cultures, and I wanted to help other people realize that and become lifelong learners themselves.
Mhm.
And as I talk to mentors, asking for advice, like, what do I do? How can I become more involved in education? Should it just be a hobby for me? Should I, maybe I can make it big on Wall Street and donate to like as a philanthropist for
Mhm.
education? People kept telling me, look, if you want to do anything in education, you need to know what it's like to be an educator. Like, you need to actually get in the classroom, get in the ring, and try to teach.
Mm,
And nobody likes when someone's calling the shots and they've never done it themselves.
mm,
So I decided that the first thing I needed to do was to teach, and then see how I liked that and what I felt about that. And I was curious to learn another language. I was curious to live abroad again, and everything just kind of pointed me to the Peace Corps. And it seemed like a crazy jump from Wall Street to Cameroon, but looking back at it, it made perfect sense.
fascinating. I have a question. How did you handle all the peer pressure that people gave you that you were making the wrong mistake, a bad mistake? That how could you leave a high-paying job, the American dream, working on Wall Street, and now here you are moving to Africa? You clearly you've lost your mind, you're short-sighted, and you don't get it.
Yeah. Um, it was tough. There was so much pressure. There was so much pressure. Even within my family, it was difficult, and people had a hard time understanding or believing what I was doing. But also, I had friends. I was lucky enough to have support and other people that did, I felt, know me better than the people criticizing me. I felt like I had people that knew me better than that understood and saw the light and said, hey, like, we believe in you, go for it. So it's about having a network that's supportive, but even more so, like, I kind of just knew in my gut. And there's something to be said for just not listening to other people all the time. Like, you can take some advice, but you really have to be able to listen to yourself. And I had the self-confidence in myself to know that that was this move I was going to make, and that's the only way that it was going to happen. But it was difficult. I'm not gonna say it wasn't. It was difficult. There was a lot of pressure, but like I said, I also was lucky enough to have supporters in my life that believed in me.
Yeah, self-confidence is so important. If you don't have self-esteem, you'll never be successful, regardless of how smart you are.
Yeah.
So, what was the education system like in Africa? How does it differ than the US?
Well, it's hard because, in Africa, there's so many countries, so many different education systems, and I'm no expert. I only know, the Cameroonian public school francophone system. There's an anglophone system. There's a francophone system. There's you know, private schools. They're Islamic schools. Like, it's so vast. Like, people like generalize Africa a lot, and it
What
really
about
it's
the
much more.
francophone versus the other one? Can you break those down?
Yeah. So, for example, Cameroon. Quick debrief. Cameroon is a country composed of 250 plus tribes. So that's 250 plus languages. That's 250 plus histories. Some of them are closer to each other, and some of them are really different from each other. The colonial history of Cameroon split the country into, you have some of the Cameroonians speak English and some of them speak French. So there's two regions of the country are Anglophone or English speaking, and the rest of the regions are Francophone or French speaking. And then some have the French school system they took from colonization. The others have the English one. So then they have a blend of them where they put them both in the same school. So it's 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 very complicated, but it's extremely different than the US system, right? Because in the end of the day, I was in classrooms with maybe 90 students, chalk, and an eraser, and that's it.
Wow.
So, like, there's not as much parent involvement, there's not as much resources, there's a lot of differences in faculty and how things work. But at the end of the day, the one thing that stays the same is that you have children that want to learn, and every human learns uh, in similar ways. So, at the end of the day, you're teaching people.
That's beautiful. What did you learn from your students? What did you learn as a teacher in a classroom of 90 Africans in a village?
Yeah, I learned so much. I did my best teaching them, but I'm sure I learned more than they did. Uh, the thing that I learned the most is from my Peace Corps experience of being, alone, being in small and big classrooms, and really being, isolated. You learn. It's kind of like mad science experiment, right? Like you are completely have to figure it out independently. You're working with all these students. How can you make it work? You don't have resources. You have one piece of chalk. Like, how can you get someone to learn what you're trying to teach them in that, 1 hour time slot? How are you able to do that? And you might fail. No big deal. Try it again the next day. You might fail again, change it up, try it again the next day. So the thing that I took away as a teacher, as an educator, was I really learned education in a pure form, like how I can get messages across using very little to no resources. And so it was a great experience as a teacher.
Yeah, I bet it was crazy. What did you learn about human nature? What did you recognize as a good way that humans learn and a way that people are procrastinating and don't comprehend information?
Yeah, I think learning, the thing I really enjoyed is that I saw the commonalities across everybody. You think that you're working with young kids, it's going to be really different. You're working with adults, it's going to be different. Or you're working with, Cameroonians that you feel like maybe they're not so exposed to like global, like all the resources that you've been exposed to. Or you're teaching, people in the US, right? Like really in the end of the day, things boil down a lot closer together than you would imagine they would. And one thing I learned in terms of techniques is like people learn by doing things. Like, you know, I'm sure even you can remember a project that you did back in like middle school or something like that, that you're proud of and that you actually retain things from.
I made a
Learning by doing and learning from experiences, like that sticks with people, and a lot more than just regurgitating notes that someone copied on the chalkboard.
yeah, yeah. That I have a problem with the U.S. education system. Once you read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, have you heard of it?
I haven't heard of that one.
Such a good book about financial freedom and the importance of real estate and cash flow, passive income, that whole genre. And do you feel like people in Africa are adept at or feel the pressure that we Americans do about the rat race of capitalism and greed? Is that also in the classrooms in Africa?
Um, I mean, I'm sure there are classrooms where that exists, right? And I think it's human nature to have it in your own like way. Like even if you're in a small village, you probably have something like, okay, well, maybe you're not plugged into like the bigger economy of the country, but even within your own, group, you might be competitive or want to be the first in your class. But honestly, yeah, you're right. Like it was kind of nice that they don't, like a lot of my students in a small village weren't concerned so much about that and those pressures of society, you know, in terms of a rat race. They had other concerns, but yeah, I think I think it exists in a bunch of African communities and schools, this rat race idea, but in many others where you're in a small village, it doesn't. And that's a pro and a con, I think,
Yeah,
because in a small village, it's just hard sometimes to get them to go to school in the first place.
yeah. Well, if someone's listening right now who is interested in quitting their job and going to pursue their passion in education, what would you recommend that they consider from the Peace Corps in Africa to another program, another country? What did you learn about that process?
I learned a lot about the process, and I'd be happy if anybody listening wants to reach out to me. But um, first, if you feel like you want to do something in your life and you're passionate about it and it keeps you up at night, do it. The longer that you fight that urge, you know, you're not gonna be happy with yourself. So I think that once you have that urge, you do your research, try to find a good way to get into the program that you want to be doing, into that sector, but go for it. Find a way to make those first steps and then keep taking it a step at a time. If you're interested in going to education, you know, there's different strokes for different folks. I believe in that, but I really agree with the idea that got me to Peace Corps, which was, I think if you want to work in education, you ought to have some teaching experience. And there are many programs that you can get into teaching. Maybe you can start as a coach. Maybe you can get teaching credentials and really go for it. There are different groups like Teach for America. There are like New York Teaching Fellows. There are plenty of different ways that you can get into a classroom, or even just get exposed to classrooms and see what it's like to be in a classroom working with students. I think that's important. And you don't have to go all the way to Cameroon to learn about education, but if you want to, I highly recommend it.
Mm-hmm. What if you had $100 million and you were going to donate it to causes in Africa? What would be those causes?
If I had $100 million to donate to Africa, I don't think I would donate all of it to Africa. Honestly, I think that foreign aid has had a really negative impact on development in Africa, and I think that most foreign aid groups working in Africa are doing a pretty bad job. But there are good groups that are doing really good work, like community-based sustainable development programs. And I don't think they would need $100 million to do it. But I would be wary of foreign aid. Um, I would look for the best ones to do it. But I would definitely invest in education. I think that of all the sectors of development, education has the best long run influences and impacts in societies, because yes, you can improve healthcare. Yes, you can improve agriculture. Yes, you can improve um, like entrepreneurship. But really, if you go to the bottom line and just improve students' education, help them become critical thinkers, help them understand how things work, how to put things together, you give them the toolkit they need to do it for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Well said. How would you invest in the education system in the U.S.? I know I would educate people in high school to learn about how to read a financial statement and the importance of real estate, because I'm all about it right now.
Yeah,
Because I'm
I
28
think
years old right now. I'm like, damn, I wish I learned this when I was 18.
yeah, I think that the U.S. definitely, puts less emphasis on trade school or business electives or something. Like, I think that should be incorporated and give students the some of the options they need to pursue things like that. And also, like, a lot of students don't come from families that have the ability to teach them about real estate or financials or even making their own bank account. So having that be more like some life skills and trade related skills in schools would be good. If I was going to invest money in the US, I would definitely be pouring it into the public school system. I think that the U.S. public school system is in danger right now, like in jeopardy, because of kind of a parasitic effect by voucher, like charter schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if we really if we were serious about education and the future of the U.S., we would want a better, stronger, robust public school system for all of our kids.
Mm-hmm. Why is the charter school system a threat to the public school system?
I think it's a threat to the U.S. public schools in general, because the complicated thing is that charter schools, while they give choice and sometimes have great models, first, you can't really regulate them across the board to make sure they're all like as cool as they say they are. And the other problem is that they take funds from our public school bucket, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if a state has their money, X amount of money for their public school students, but you have all these charter schools dipping into that pot, the kids whose parents didn't know to put them into a good charter school, or the kids who are not the right neighborhood to go to the charter, etc., they're getting, they're losing out because these charter schools are sucking the money from the public school pot. And that means that we have a lot of kids getting left behind in public school system because the money's going to these charter schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, it's a public good education, and all students are students. Like even if you're, you know, from a bad neighborhood, you should be able to receive a good education because
I
it's a
agree.
public good.
I didn't know anything about that rivalry between charter schools with public schools.
Don't worry, Benji. You'll have kids one day. You'll
I'll
learn all
figure it out.
about it.
So I'm curious, how did Africans, when I say Africans, I mean Cameroonians, because
Okay.
Africa is a big continent. How did Cameroonians, the people that you talked to and built a relationship with, how do they view America?
So Cameroon has really good image of America. I think it depends a lot. Different countries in Africa have different ideas, but a major amount, like the majority of Cameroonians like America,
Mm-hmm.
primarily because we're not involved in the history of colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
We seem kind of like the neutral good guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
All right, let's talk about that.
Across the board, like if I was walking around and I was, if anybody was talking to me when they found out I was American, it was typically greeted by, positive reaction.
Interesting. I'm surprised, even though I'm very naive when it comes to. I've never been to Africa, so I don't know. I have no experience. Well, let's talk
Let's
about
go.
colonialism. That's fascinating that you brought that up. I think of the Dutch, the English, the French,
Spanish.
the Spanish. So, did you feel like there was a remnants of a colonializing country? I assume France, because you speak French right now because you live in Cameroon. Did it feel?
Yeah, Cameroon, pretty recent history, more recent than, we're both of Mexican heritage, and we still have plenty of stereotypes and jokes and cultural references to Spanish colonization, its impact in Mexican history, but that was like maybe 100 years later than what the Cameroonians are dealing with. So they have pretty fresh wounds and memories up to like mid 1800s of the French. Like, so no, like later than that, really. But yeah, into the 1900s. I'm sorry, that was a mistake. Yeah, late 1900s, and so now there's a lot of animosity among some people towards the French, and some people talk about the relations with the different countries, because Cameroon was colonized by the Germans, the English, and the French. So definitely a lot of these African nations have, sore, still open wounds because of colonization, and they're growing through it and adjusting, and, time goes on and they adapt and adjust, but it's still much more recent than we would imagine because it's later here in the Americas.
Mm-hmm. What's the future of Africa in your eyes? 10, 20 years
Oh
from
man,
now?
it's huge. It's huge. It's huge. Just in terms of numbers, like take Cameroon for example. 50% of the population in Cameroon is 18 years old or younger. Just think of that.
50%?
50% of the population of Cameroon is 18 years old or younger.
Wow.
So whether ready or not, here they come. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they're gonna come. They're growing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know. I think it's gonna change a lot. I don't know if Pan-Africanism, where like this idea of a big trade bloc and countries working together across Africa, if it's going to be successful. I don't know what it's going to be like, the relationship with China, how that's going to change. Like working as someone that used to be in Wall Street trade finance, working in Africa, seeing like Chinese like building projects and everything going on was fascinating. But I'm not sure. Time will tell, and it's gonna play out soon. But there'll be winners, there'll be losers.
Yeah. Tell me about Africa's cities. Like, what's the New York City of Africa, and the LA, the Houston, the Miami, and the little town in Arkansas? Can you?
Man, I think that I don't know. I'm no expert. Like I said, the one I know best is Cameroon. But I think that it's kind of similar to some countries in Latin America that you might know, where like Mexico City, right? Just like megapolis, crazy, like huge, chaotic, everyone all over on top of each other. And then you go out a little bit past the slums and you can find really small villages. So it's kind of similar where the country is grouped in these big metropolises and then little villages. And then like the New York, LA, I don't know, Senegal, Senegal, Dakar is a big hotspot. Lagos, huge hotspot, capital of Nigeria. Of course, South Africa, Cape Town, Johannesburg. Those are big cities. There's a lot to explore, man. It's a huge part of the world, and it's full of everyone thinks of all the problems and stuff, but it's the same as you're Latino, and how everyone has these misconceptions about Latin America. It's the same thing. If you go anywhere in Africa, I'm sure you will enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm excited to go. So what's the future hold for you, Louie? What's next? What do you want to do?
So for me, I kind of went into Peace Corps and education thinking, maybe I won't like it. What's my backup plan? And I was thinking, I'll do this, I'll make the most of it, and maybe I'll just go to get an MBA and go back to finance. But I'm not. There's no looking back. I really enjoy teaching. I really want to teach more to get more experience that complements, that kind of being in a little classroom with no help. I would like to teach in an environment where I have help and guidance and working with other people who believe in education reform. So I'm applying to a master's program at Columbia Teacher College. It would be a master's in education and getting some teaching experience working in New York high school. So I hope that comes to fruition and I get some more teaching experience. At the moment, I'm working with an education startup in Latin America called Latin American Leadership Academy, LALA, and I'm helping them and learning about the business side of an education, startup, and trying to see if I can combine my passions for global business with education and see what that's like. So I'm just exploring, Benji, and walking step at a time, learning, looking forward, and it's good.
Yeah. What do you want to teach? Like, what subject?
I think I would teach social studies. I think I can speak to the experience. Like I've traveled, seen different cultures. I understand a bit how history repeats itself for better, for worse. I think I can relate to that. I'm an economics major, so I kind of did a lot of studying about human interaction and global trade. So I think I have the most to offer as a social studies teacher. And I would like to teach English, but didn't take enough credits at college.
Well, you definitely were one of the most interesting students at Amherst. You definitely were friends with everybody, spoke every language, and were a black belt taekwondo ninja. So big respects to you. So before we hop off, a question that I have for everybody now moving forward on the podcast. It's the signature question. And it is, what's the one thing you would change about this world and why?
The one thing I would change about this world.
How would you make the world better?
If I could do anything to make the world better, I would focus on improving education for all children. I think if I could, it's a crazy dream, but you asked me for a big wish. So if I could wish for a fun, enthralling education experience for all kids growing up and giving every student the passion for learning that every person is capable of, that would be my wish. And I'm sure that once every kid wanted to learn, the world would be a much better place.
Mm-hmm. So because you're in the space, what do you think are the tools, the companies that are going to make that happen?
It's tricky. I think that there's a lot of problems with some companies are in it for the money. Some companies are trying to do things, but maybe they haven't tested their materials yet. I'm curious to see how technology can help and hurt education. Ed tech with artificial intelligence can be a great opportunity, but also presents problems. So I'm not sure who's going to lead, but I really think it comes down to the parents. And if we can get parents more involved, that will be a great start. So I think big players right now in the education space that I'm excited about. I'm excited about my own startup. I'm with Latin American Leadership Academy. I'm excited about Finland. The Finnish education system is really exciting. I think is a good role model for many other countries. So I'm
Why?
not sure, Benji. Why? The Finnish education model is really special. It definitely can't be replicated everywhere, but they focus so much on, giving students freedom and making learning fun and paying teachers well and giving respect to education in their society. So it's a good place to start.
Nice. So, what do you think is going to be the title of this podcast?
I'm gonna leave that one up to you.
Yeah, what do we talk about? Africa and education.
No, too broad.
All right, help me out here. Help me make this podcast better.
How can we name this podcast? I would say trusting your gut and moving forward.
Beautiful. That was deep. So awesome having you on the podcast, Louie. It's so good to see you. I'm excited to see what the future holds for education, Africa, and you. And to those of you listening, if you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe and give me a review. Would really appreciate it. Awesome, Louie. Muchas gracias. Adiós. Au revoir, mon frère.
De nada. Un abrazo.
Lightweight.